We'll now hear from Simon Randall on the Auckland Plan 2050 6-monthly update, together with Richard Hughes. So Simon is our team leader strategic scanning, and Richard is our principal specialist on the Auckland Plan. Thank you for your paper, gentlemen, and we've got a presentation. Simon.
Kia ora hu mai tātou, tēnā koe te himana, through you, Mr. Chair. This is a presentation in 3 parts. The first part, which I'm going to cover, is the 6-monthly update against the Auckland Plan. This is the second update that we'll be presenting since the adoption of the Auckland Plan 2050. Richard Hughes is going to cover the second 2 parts, which will cover the annual monitoring report and also an update on targets development. In terms of the 6-monthly update, in terms of reforms and initiatives that have occurred in the last 6 months, the government's adopted the wellbeing budget. That is significant in 2 parts. The first is that there is a close alignment between the wellbeings that they've adopted and the objectives in the Auckland Plan, which creates fertile space for us to work closely through its implementation with central government, and talks to the wider process that central government's talking about in terms of the way agencies can work as one in regions, particularly with key stakeholders and partners such as local government. The second aspect of significance with the wellbeing budget is that there are a number of specific initiatives enumerated in your report that deliver on the outcomes sought in the Auckland Plan. There are some other initiatives that have occurred in the last 6 months of significance to the Auckland Plan. There are 2 in the housing space. So we've had adoption of the regulations for the Healthy Home Standards, and they'll kick into place initially in 2021 and will be rolled out accordingly. And as Penny Pirrett has just spoken about, we've had the introduction of the first of 2 bills establishing kainga ora. We've also had the Climate Change Response Zero Carbon Amendment Bill introduced, and that will be considered in terms of our submission as Council at the Environment Committee next week. In terms of the 6-monthly update, the Auckland Plan is a digital plan, it is a living plan, and it sets the vision for Auckland in the next 30 years. And so as part of these 6-monthly updates, we keep the evidence and the information that's in the Auckland Plan current, and the digital plan will be updated after this meeting. In terms of updates for this 6-monthly report, we've had NZTA's Crash Analysis System 2018 data introduced, and so we'll update the plan with the 2018 data. That is also feeding into one of the measures that Richard will talk about shortly. We've had a number of climate change risk assessment technical reports that will be from Council's REMU unit, and they will be added to the evidence reports. And we've also had the adoption of the Regional Pest Management Plan and the Ubin-Ngāhere Forest Strategy, and so they'll be added as supporting plans. Just to note that in terms of the census and the aligned te kupunga reports, we are still waiting for those, and as covered in the report, they might have impacts in terms of the fact that they have been delayed and they may not be released at the level of granularity that we're expecting. They might have impacts in terms of our planning for the LTP and other key strategies. That's the end of the 6-month update. I'm now going to hand over to Richard Hughes.
Thank you, Simon. I'll be quite brief in terms of, we won't be going through every measure, obviously. This is the first annual monitoring report we brought to the committee. Previously, we brought the baseline report, which is where we were starting from. The two graphs on the display here basically represent a summary of the executive summary which is in that report. This process still remains a bit of a work in progress due to probably availability of data and other sort of factors, but in summary, we're at the moment, we now have 27 measures which we can call we have a baseline against. Of the balance, we have 4 measures which we are still under further development. One of those is whānau wellbeing, and the other 3 are in that environmental space. We also have 2 measures which are sort of sitting there idle at the moment due to the unavailability of the current census data, so that will be coming through. The trends, which is on the table to the pie chart to the right, basically that's just sort of telling us what we know at this point. It doesn't go into any great depth or analysis in terms of why those trends are occurring. At the moment, across those different outcomes, we can say we have 8 positive trends. So those trends represent those things that are tracking upwards in a positive sense and those things that are tracking positively in a downward sense as well. So in terms of the negative trends, we have 4, and there's 11 with no significant change. As I sort of stated previously, there's also insufficient data at the moment to actually say we can identify a trend, and we've probably been a little bit, I suppose, what's the word? Flexible in how we've interpreted a trend at this point. Ideally, we would love a series of number of data sets dating back 10 years, etc. That's not always available, so we've been slightly loose in when we're calling things a trend. However, that said, in terms of those things that we are sort of looking at in the negative sense, things such as homelessness, transport deaths, educational achievement of young people, and I won't sort of bore you with all of those, so I'd sort of recommend you sort of go to the report and have a look through those. So just sort of wanted to signal what will be coming to you next will be the 3-yearly monitoring progress report. That's coming to you next year. We're calling it the 3-yearly monitoring report, even though it'll be the 2nd year of our actual data collection. The intention behind that is so that we can present something to this committee which will help to sort of assist in the decision making that will be associated with the LTP. That will start to incorporate another level of data sets that sit beneath it, so it will start to really go into some sort of analysis and as to the drivers as to why things are tracking in a particular direction. We also intend, wherever possible, from the outset to start to map some of these things more spatially, so it will provide across these measures where possible a broader heat map for the city, so you can start looking at these particular measures not just in isolation, but we can start putting together a bit more of a story and a picture. In terms of the improvements to the monitoring, I think I've already mentioned those areas that we're looking to develop further measures that they sit within that Māori identity and wellbeing. Another sort of, I suppose, progress since we last reported to you was the transport and access measures. There was some slight concerns, as I recall, from this committee around us using model data specifically to say how transport is going. We have been working closely with ATAP because they too, through that sort of model, have had concerns expressed that we need to be able to start to quantify properly on actual data how the transport network is happening. So that work is currently in place with ATAP. And again, the environmental and cultural heritage, I think that will remain sort of an ongoing process in terms of improvement, just as more data becomes available and it becomes we can provide you with greater information. In particular, I think the unitary plan provides real opportunities as they move into some real reporting against their work. That brings me to the other part, which is around the targets. Previously, we came to this committee sort of seeking approval to set up a political working group whereby we would go down and work with central government specifically on 4 areas. As a result of that work or lack of that work, we're now presenting a new approach due to different priorities, etc. That didn't sort of prove feasible. So what we're basically proposing in the report is that we leverage off those existing works of program that we know are underway, which will probably result in eventual targets, or targets can be rolled in as an outcome of that work. We think that sort of represents some really strong advantages that the previous process didn't offer. I mean, one of those obvious things is there's already buy-in to the process. Section 80 of the legislation with which the Auckland Plan operates under requires us to work with broader stakeholders to endeavour to gain their support in the implementation of the plan. We think targets are a great way of achieving that. And basically, as we work through that process, we'll be obviously, with the additional targets that we already have sort of working, as I've got examples up there, it's our intention, or it will be our commitment, to bring those things back to this committee for your agreement and sign-off, whilst keeping the political working group that was formed as a result of the previous resolution of this committee there as in an advisory capacity to us. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Questions, members? Councillor Wayne Walker.
So, I've got a question around the measures, the data that we're interrogating, particularly as it goes to belonging and participation. And the concern I want to raise, unlike a number of the other measures which I'd suggest are relatively hard measures, they're based on data. This information is very much based around perception. So the sense of community in their neighbourhood, agree, disagree, sense of safety, quality of life, health. I would suggest that there's actually real-world data, that's hospital statistics that go to health, that there are statistics that go to crime, home burglaries, other things, and that this notion around a sense of community, that could be reflected in participation at events that council might be organising or the like. So we actually shift to some hard data rather than what I'd call warm fuzzy stuff, which can alter significantly depending on the information within the survey, the particular time that the survey is conducted, because larger events sometimes impact on people's perception. And I really question the worth and the comparative worth of some of this data as it stands over time, and just what it's telling us, because I don't think it's going to tell me much.
Richard, have you got a response to that?
Yes. No, I'm sort of, I have to say I agree to some extent. I mean, those belonging and participation ones are obviously drawn from the Quality of Life survey, which is, as you might call, warm fuzzy. However, it's the intention through the deep dive to dig deeper. So, for example, in that health space, we've been talking very closely with the DHBs, and we know for a fact that they do provide extensive data which provides us with the actual health, I suppose, as you call hard data, how it's actually playing out. So we consider the perception is great, but we need to validate it with what you might call some harder information, and that will be part of the drive of the deep dive every 3 years.
So I understand the response. I guess my supplementary question is, obviously there's a cost involved in these surveys, these fuzzy surveys. If they're not up to it, why pump the money in there? Because I don't think they're going to stand any kind of test over time, as compared to some hard data and pumping some resource into that and making that better.
Thank you. Other questions, members?
So there was another question.
I heard it as a statement.
No, it was a question.
If you want to make it a question, actually frame it as a question, because it was a statement.
Okay, so my question is, why don't you dump the fuzzy stuff and put the resource into the hard stuff? If frankly that's what's going to tell us the picture anyway.
Well, I think Richard has just said, and look, reading this report, the second of our monitoring reports, it's actually still early stages. There are data sets that we've inherited that are maybe not relevant.
So let me ask a specific question.
No, please, just hold. I'm speaking.
Oh, are you answering my question?
You can be rude, but I'm speaking still.
It's just a question.
And so what we've heard is that there are data sets that we've relied upon that may not be relevant. There are monitorings that are occurring at the moment. Air quality is a classic example. We monitor air in just 3 locations. Three locations, but we're expanding that. And so in the future, we'll have data sets from, I think it is up to 10, something like that. So it is at the early stages, Councillor, and things are changing as we improve our monitoring, and our research unit is doing that. Do you have anything else to add there, Richard?
What does the quality of life survey cost us? That's a specific question.
I would have to sort of go back to Remy. I mean, they oversee that, and in response to, is it soft? I mean, it is a respected document. It has got the back data. In terms of that health question, you know, we consulted quite heavily with the DHBs. They said if you had one measure, they agreed with this one. They think self-perception is something that is worth measuring, but they said, you know, sense of mortality, you can't beat that if your life expectancy is going up or going down. But again, that will just be rolled in. So.
Thank you. Other questions, members?
Thank you. And I mean, it is a worthwhile discussion. I'm a huge supporter of this, the slightly softer, and I think Councillor Walker's quite right to question why we would have this as a valid thing. So my question is my interpretation correct when looking at things like belonging and participation, that is and can be perceived as fuzzy. However, perceptions of safety, we use that when we work out lighting, street furniture, all of those sort of issues. So, you know, I guess, is that where we would see this being the most useful? Because the hard data, the quantifiable data, is how many people are murdered on that street. And in 99.999% of the time, no one is murdered or attacked on those streets. But if people feel unsafe, we need to act. So is that how we're using our so-called soft data?
I could just say yes. I mean, we haven't applied it yet, but obviously perception is quite strong. And if we're looking at it across the region, one person's perception versus another person's perception, we would like to then validate with sort of the hard data, because some areas where you might see hard crime data, people actually report a greater sense of community, which is probably counterintuitive to some of us. So it does need to be supported. So in isolation, you can't look at these measures really in isolation, either supporting data or what's happening in other spaces as well, because, you know, I'm not an expert on crime stats, obviously, but, you know, there can be legacy things that have happened 15 or 20 years ago, and that perception still remains. So then I think that's where council gets into that soft space, is how do we turn that around? So there's a direct response to crime, and then there's also that community sense, which I think is where we're picking up that.
Thank you. Other questions? Thank you. Somebody like to move? Councillor Hulse will move. Do I have a second? I'll second. Then all those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no, and declare that carried. We'll take a 10-minute break, members. Oh, yes. No, sorry. We will go through until midday. We'll go through to midday because the Hauraki Golf Forum has got to convene for a meeting then. So we'll lose some members for, I think, about an hour. Now, that means I would like to discuss the item 11 after we have a break. Because we just need to check something off. So I'll go to page 117 and I'll see if the staff are here. It's the private plan change. Are the staff here for the private plan changes? Oh, Michael? And Ross? Okay. Ross, can you come up and we'll look at the private plan changes first, please?
Chair, so this is item 12?
Yeah, we're going to, we'll probably do before lunch, hopefully we can do item 12 and 13 and then take a break and then come back to others.
The difficulty that I have is dealing with item 12 is that there's a discussion to be had in item 11 that I think impacts on item 12. So I'm not sure
Let's see, where are we in the, I'm just
I
looking.
mean, I suppose I asked the question, can I raise issues?
Tell you what, can I, maybe if we could, would this work? If we could maybe get through the balance of the agenda and then go back to 11 and then 12. Would that satisfy you?
I'm just wanting to know whether I can ask questions about this item 12 in respect of item 11, which we haven't dealt with.
Okay, can we do, Michael, you're working on the James Kirkpatrick private plan change. Sorry, Ross, can we just swap you out for a minute, please? Michael, can we progress your paper, please, which is